to the years that he was, besides the years that he was in, he was by his father-in-law in Haran. He lived in Israel, and somehow these years in Egypt, which is, was considered at that time the lowest of places, morally, and somehow those were his best years. And one idea that we could take from that is that a lot of times we don't know how we end up in a certain situation. Jacob's like thinking to himself, "How did I end up in Egypt? Well, like what? How did that happen?" But the point is that he made sure that even though he's going to Egypt, which again is considered the lowest of nations, and the morally deprived people, he made sure, like we mentioned last week, that he sent his son Judah, to go ahead before they even came. It doesn't say clearly in the Torah what he was sent ahead to do, but Rashi explains that he was sent to establish a yeshiva, a study hall, a synagogue, etc., before they even get there, and that's how Jacob in Egypt was able to so to speak have a good Jewish life, because I preempted his arrival to Egypt with Torah study and with a Jewish community, and that's obviously something that we all could take a lesson for. Is that wherever we end up, I'm sure, and at least most people here, didn't ever thought they'd end up here or there, etc. Let's just say Florida. Let's put it like that. When you were a kid, you never thought you'd live in Florida, but that is. But once you move to a new place, again, it doesn't make a difference how you landed there. It's important to find the community, to find the Jewish community. It's important to connect, to have Torah study, etc. And that's the way we were able to live a good, Yiddish Leben, a good Jewish life, no matter where we are. And they're just like Jacob lived his best years uh, in Egypt, of all places. So it's really, in other words, it's really up to us to make sure that we're reaching out, we're creating, we're part of it, and creating this Jewish environment for ourselves wherever we find ourselves. And today, it's amazing, but you can go literally around the world, any country, basically any place, and there's a Jewish community there. There's people that are do the same things that you do, and people that are happy to see you, and people that are wanting to connect with you, which I think is something very beautiful about our Jewish family, literally our mishpacha. We consider all the Jews around the world our mishpacha, and that's something that's very special. We shouldn't take for granted. They're already joking. I mean, okay, it's not a good joke, maybe, but about like, oh, there's already Chabad in Gaza. Um, so but the point of that is, again, that no matter where the circumstances are, where people find themselves, we can we can make the best of the situation and create Jewish infrastructure, etc. And then we could live a good Jewish life, no matter where we are. Um, So going back to the story of the Torah portion, what it talks about. So it says that Jacob was, he realized his days were numbered, and he called Yosef, his son Joseph, to him, and he wanted to speak to him. What he wanted to ask of him, he wanted to ask him a favor, that when Jacob will pass away, he wants to be buried in Israel, specifically in Israel, and obviously we are in Israel, in the Ma'arat HaMachpelah, the cave of the patriarchs, which is in Hebron, and he wanted to be buried there. Now, you could ask why. Why do you want to be buried there? So Rashi actually gives a few reasons what he was worried about. In other words, what we see here, what happened here was that Jacob asked Joseph, "I know that you're a viceroy here. You're a macher. You can get things done, and I'm asking you, I'm begging of you, please make sure I'm not buried in Egypt, even though they will want me to be buried here." And one of the reasons that he was worried about is that he didn't want to be considered a deity, a god in Egypt, because if last week's Torah portion we kind of, it was hinted to that Jacob, once Jacob came to Egypt and blessed Pharaoh, the famine stopped. There was supposed to be 7 years of famine. This was, if you follow the story, we're 2 years into the 7 years of famine, and somehow all of a sudden, if you at the end of last week's Torah portion, Joseph is giving the Egyptians seeds and stuff to plant. You're like, what planting is going on? There's a famine happening. And Rashi mentions, oh, it's because the famine ended. Once Jacob came down to Egypt, the famine ended in Egypt. So, um, the Egyptians knew that Jacob was a special holy person, etc., and therefore, um, therefore he was worried that they would look at him as a deity again, and they wouldn't let him be buried anywhere else, and um, therefore they. I'm just going to mute one person. A moment. Okay, so 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 again, so therefore he needed Joseph specifically, who had some sort of control and power to be able to guarantee that he won't be seized by the Egyptians as a god. A few other reasons. One of the things you always hear about is the idea that one of the big one of the 13 principles of faith. Yeah, Maimonides outlines. The last one actually is the Ani Mamin. Yeah, everyone, I believe that one day where there will be Tchiyat HaMesim. There will be a revival of the dead. Our lost ones will come back. Yeah, in times of Mashiach, and obviously there's a lot to talk about that topic. But just just that fact itself, again, that it will happen. Where will it happen? Where will the bodies emerge from? And it said that it will be in Israel. So how do the people that were buried not in Israel get to Israel? So for me personally, I'm like, okay, I don't know, they'll figure it, like, whatever, we'll figure it out then. Like, it doesn't bother me so much. But there's the answer to it might bother a little bit is the idea that it says that there will be tunnels, and I know tunnels is a trigger word right now, so I'm not going to say it too much. But there'll be tunnels under, um, you know, where the bodies will kind of roll, so to speak, uh, till they get to Israel, and then they will come up there. So therefore, there's this concept out there that I'm trying to be buried in Israel, because then the body won't have to go through that. Will just come up right away. That's another concept. There's another. Rashi mentions another thing is there's other reasons why this why he wanted to be buried in Israel. But yeah, there's definitely. I'm sure you've heard of people that that they specifically wanted to be buried in Israel. It's something interesting that I haven't looked into because I'm not a Kohen, but people that are a Kohen, it's definitely not the most simple thing for them to take halal flights. It's just like, well, why can't a Kohen take an halal flight? Because we know that one of the laws specifically unique to a Kohen is that a Kohen cannot become in contact with a dead body. I don't know if you've ever noticed. Uh, let's see if you ever gone to the Rebbe's Ohel, let's say, the Bob's Rebbe's Ohel in Queens, in Old Montefiore Cemetery. You'll notice that from where you kind of go into the cemetery until the Ohel itself, there's these gates with, gates that are, probably 3 feet high or whatever. And they're there for a reason, halachically, in order to kind of separate between the walkway, the pathway, and the graves, because a Kohen that wants to go to the Rebbe's Ohel would has to pass through the graves, and he can't be there. He can't be in the cemetery, so that's the way they avoid that issue. I remember as a kid, um, you know, the Rebbe passed away less than 10 years before that, and in general, the way we look at it is like it's a temporary thing. We're hoping for Mashiach to come. So there wasn't a lot of infrastructure there, and they didn't even have these gates when I was growing up. So what they had, something interesting is what they had was these kind of like these boxes, like almost like to put it in words, would be like a portable mechitza, from four sides that that a Cohen could like kind of walk with, or people would carry it for him. I don't remember exactly. I think it would depends if you had friends around you or not. But you kind of like people walked in these box, like in this with this kind of mechitza around them, this box around them, until they got to the OL, just to avoid coming uh, close to a Kohen. I'm talking about specifically Kohanes again, not any person. I'm talking about specifically a Kohen. They would, in order to avoid coming in contact with the dead body. That's that's what was going on in those days. I remember. I don't think this worked, but as kids we thought it worked. And if we had any classmates, that were a Cohen, and obviously there weren't that many of these boxes that you can use. So if they were all taken or whatever, so as friends we would kind of interlock our hands, together and form a circle around the Kohen and walk with the Kohen to the OL, just to so you can avoid being um, near the graves. Um, but going back to the alal, so on a I don't know how often, but often enough on an alal flight, there'll be a body in the cargo that's being transferred to Israel to be buried. Um, and Again, because that person wanted to specifically be buried in Israel, but that makes it not so simple halachically for a Kohen to be on such a flight if there's a dead body in the cargo. Now, again, I'm not going to go into the details, but that's again just something interesting that you might find interesting. Um, but going back to what we're discussing again is that Jacob wants to be buried in Israel, and again he can only rely on Joseph. So he gets Joseph to swear that he's going to bury him in Israel. Then moving along, Jacob becomes ill. In other words, he ages, and it's something interesting. I don't remember the source exactly, so I can't spell it out at length. But basically, there's this idea that I remember hearing that Jacob was the first one to really age. You know, I only being in Palm Beach, I see I can relate to it a little more. No one here is aging, um, but um, I'm joking. I know some of you here on the call are 80 or 80 plus, but you would never know. You would never guess. Um, but Jacob, this whole idea of aging really didn't the way I heard it. Maybe it's more of a legend, but didn't really exist. What would happen is someone would pass away, they would sneeze, and their soul would in the beginning of Genesis of this book, it says God blew the soul into the nostrils, and then that's how it would leave through the nostrils when someone would sneeze. Um, I don't know exactly how it worked, but that's the general idea, and that's why, by the way, we say Gesundheit, right? I remember when I was young, I was a kid. That's what they said. We say Gesundheit, zu gesund, and all these things, is because sneezing is not it definitely used to not be like a simple thing. I don't know if you've ever noticed that. I think I've mentioned this once or twice, that if you ever see someone that after they sneeze, they kind of like tug their ear like this. They say hach, like they'll tug their ear, and it's a little odd why they are pulling themselves. And I remember hearing that they're kind of like checking to make sure they're still alive. You ever like pinch yourself, like the concept, like you pinch yourself, I'm still here, like you feel the pain. Oh, okay, now I know I'm still alive. I know I'm actually experiencing this. So along those lines is the idea. Oh, after someone sneezes, you kind of like just so they would give a little tug to make sure they're still alive. Anyways, those might be more of a shtick, but definitely this idea was out there, and Jacob is the first one that actually became. He asked, the way I heard it was that Jacob asked Hashem to um, kind of give him a heads up, so to speak, that his days were numbered. So in order that he can be able to bless his children, etc., like we're going to see in this week's Torah portion, but he was the first one really that had this idea of aging in a way of till then becoming sick, etc., and then passing away. That's what I remember hearing. It's definitely the first time it's mentioned in the Torah. This idea that someone he wasn't says he in chapter 48 it says it came to pass after these things that someone said to Joseph, "Behold, your father is ill." Yeah, and in other words, he's going to pass away soon. That was something that wasn't common. But Jacob wanted that in order to get a heads up, so to speak, in order to be able to bless his children. So I just thought that would be something interesting to mention. Um, so now that he became sick and he was about to pass away, so Joseph visited him, Bikur Cholim, to visit the sick, visit his father, and he brought his two sons with him, Ephraim and Menashe, or sorry, Menashe and Ephraim, right? And it's important what the order is, because the famous story I'm about to mention. But Menashe was the older one, right? And Ephraim was the younger one. Menashe and Ephraim. Those were Joseph's two sons that were born in Egypt before Jacob came. Uh, now, one thing he blessed Menashe and Ephraim with is that they will be considered uh, they both be considered tribes, just like the other sons of Jacob. So even though they're really grandchildren of Jacob, they had the status as if they were a son of Jacob. So let's say when we talk about the 12 tribes, right? Or the most practical way it plays out is in Israel, right? Israel was divided when Joshua came with the Jewish people. It was divided into 12 sections for the 12 tribes, and each tribe got their portion of the land. So Joseph's two sons, Menashe and Ephraim, they both got separate pieces of land. It wasn't like, oh, Joseph and his descendants got a specific land. No, they were considered two separate tribes. They got their own pieces of land, Menashe and Ephraim, in the land of Israel when the Jews came up. That's just one example. Now, if you do the math, you could ask a question: how does the math work out? If there's 12 sons, right? We know Jacob had 12 sons. Now you're kind of taking away Joseph, but you're putting in two in his place, Menashe and Ephraim. So you have 13, not 12. So how does that work out? So in those contexts, the tribe of Levi, which is the tribe of Moses, the tribe of Aaron, etc. The tribe of Levi is not counted as one of the tribes in that context. What do I mean? So the tribe of Levi did not get any specific pieces of land in Israel. There was no section in Israel called the section of Levi. There's Judea, right? There's other parts of Israel where the different tribes lived, but Levi did not get the tribe of Levi, which was the third son, did not get their own piece of land. Rather, they had cities scattered throughout Israel, 42 plus the 6 refuge cities of refuge. So it's a total of 48 cities that they had, but no like specific area that they had. There's they're supposed to be the teachers, etc. They need to be spread out. They're also the main idea is that they're the servants of Hashem, and they didn't really. Their job was to be Kohens and Levies, and therefore it wasn't necessarily to work in agriculture and things like that. And therefore they weren't really they didn't have any land. They're supposed to be more spiritual people, let's just say. So therefore they did not get any land, and therefore the whole tribe of Levi didn't count in the splitting up of Israel, and therefore Menashe and Ephraim being added to the other tribes still equals 12 instead of 13. That's just something interesting to know. Again, so that's what Jacob tells them. He says, "You're going to be considered to me like children." And then Joseph asks Jacob to bless the children, to bless his two children. So how does he bless them? So Joseph, puts famous story where Joseph puts the older son on Jacob's right side and the younger son on Jacob's left side, because the older, we know in Judaism that we say the right hand is considered, more, more special, I guess. And Jacob, we know, famously switches, kind of crosses his arms and puts his right hand on the younger son, Ephraim, and his left hand on the older son, Menashe. And Joseph is like, maybe you made a mistake. How come you maybe you're not realizing? I forgot to mention that Jacob became not, I don't know if literally blind, but he was very hard of he didn't have good eyesight, And so therefore Joseph thought maybe is because he wasn't really seeing what was in front of him. And Jacob said, no, I know exactly what I'm doing. I know that this is the older one, this is the younger one, and I'm purposely putting my right hand on the younger one and the left hand on the older one, because the younger one will become greater than the older one. The younger one's descendants will be greater than the older one. Um, and just the classic understanding of that is that Joshua, who was the one that took over after Moses, Joshua, he led the Jewish people into Israel itself and led the conquest, etc. He was from the tribe of Ephraim. Again, we're calling it a tribe based on what we mentioned earlier, but he was from the tribe of Ephraim, which was the younger brother, and therefore, no one from Menashe ever got close to Joshua's status, and that's why Menashe, Jacob felt compelled to put his right hand on Ephraim, who would have greater descendants. But he blessed both of them. He wasn't taking away from their blessings. He blessed both of them, and um, he gave them the famous blessing idea that he says, Hamalach Hagoa Loisimi Kalra Yivarich Es Hanaarim, right? It's a famous song that they sing to children. I'm not going to sing it to you because I'd embarrass myself, but it's a famous song that parents sing to their children. Hamalach Hagoa Loisimi Kalra Yivarich Es Hanaarim Kari Behem Shemi V'Shem Avosai Avram Yitzchak V'Yakov. And the idea he compares them, may they multiply like fish, which is a famous analogy. Jews are like fish, etc. So that's the blessing he gives them. And then there's another line in the next aliyah where Jacob, after Joseph says, "Oh, why are you putting your right hand on Ephraim?" He tells him, "I know what I'm doing," and he says, "I'm going to increase the blessing." And he says, "Yisivucha lekim k'Ephraim and Menashe." In other words, whenever we're blessing children, there's a custom to bless someone to bless their children on Friday nights, or if they're not with them, Friday afternoon. So one of the lines that are always said is, "Yisimcha Elikim ke'Ephraim v'Menashe." May God make you like Ephraim and like Menashe. And that's the blessing that Jacob gave Joseph, that the Jews should always, whenever they're giving blessings to their children, they should always mention Ephraim and Menashe. So that's also, again, that's clearly written, that's spelled out clearly in this week's Torah portion. Moving along. Now, after Jacob, again, got Joseph to swear that he's going to bury him in Israel, gave the blessings to his children, etc. Now it's time that Jacob wants to bless all of his children, and he delivers this, long poetic blessing, and it's kind of cryptic. The blessings, what he's trying to say, and why it pertains to each individual son. But if you read through it, you'll see each one, especially with the commentaries, of why they got this blessing. So let's just give an example. So it starts off with Reuven. He says, Reuven, you are my firstborn, my strength, my initial vigor, foremost in rank and foremost in power. Water like impudency, you cannot be foremost because you mounted your father's bed. Then you desecrated him who ascended on my couch. In other words, the one he was praising him and saying you were supposed to be, the Bechor, the firstborn, the king, etc. But because you messed up, therefore, you won't be that one. So on the one he's praising him, and on the other hand he's criticizing him. Same with Shimon and Levi, he criticizes them because they killed out the city of Shechem. But then Judah, he says, you'll always be the leader. He compares Judah to a lion. And then you'll see a lot of the blessings, it connects specific tribes with specific animals. And that's why if you ever, that's where the concept of a lion comes into Judaism, because Judah is given the blessing or compared to a lion. Then you have, who else says it? Yisachar is like a strong bone donkey. And then he says Dan is like a serpent, like a snake. And then there's I know Binyamin is like a wolf, and is compared to a wolf, and Joseph like an ox. By the way, just the idea of the wolf. If I don't know if anyone here has been involved with the Shul's partnership with Shiloh and the Binyamin region, but Shiloh again, where the tabernacle was until Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. Um, there, that's the Binyamin region. That's where the tribe of Binyamin had their portion. And if you ever look at their kind of their emblem or their symbol, etc., you'll see wolves as part of it. That's because of this blessing here from Jacob. Um, yeah, and again, each one gets their specific blessing. Like Asher gets a blessing of abundant olive oil. We know Naphtali gets the blessing to be speedy, like his crops should grow speedy like a deer. Um, so that's another thing that you'll see. Okay, I guess I'm not going to go through all the specific, blessings that each one got. The point is, it says that Jacob, after all the blessings, he passes away at the age of 147, and there's an extended, mourning period in Egypt. But finally, Joseph's able to get permission from Pharaoh to carry Jacob back to Israel, up to Israel. There's this big funeral procession. Um, not only the brothers went with Jacob to be buried, but also the elders of Egypt came as well, and they buried Jacob in Israel. There's a whole dramatic story there, but not for now. After coming back to Egypt, now Joseph's brothers are afraid because they think that maybe Joseph was nice to us until now because Jacob was around and he didn't want to upset his father that his children are not getting along. He's been through enough tsaris, as we say. So that's what so they're worried that maybe now that their father passed away, Joseph is going to turn on them and not treat them well, and therefore there's this whole kind of thing that they do. Yeah, Joseph, we're ready to be your slaves, etc., because they were afraid. And Joseph assures them that don't worry, I'm not trying to get any revenge for you selling me to slavery, and I have no hard feelings, no ill feelings against you, so you have nothing to worry about. And then last aliyah in this week's Torah portion, which is again the last aliyah of the whole book of Genesis, is talks about how it's not a long one, but it talks about how Joseph basically at the end of his life, he passes away at the ripe old age of 110. And before he passed away, he tells the brothers. Sorry, was like, excuse me. He tells the brothers that they're gonna they might be stuck in Egypt for a while, but God won't forget them and God will take them out one day. He gives them that promise. And he says, similar to his father, he says, what but? There's always a but. When you are finally taken out of Egypt, I want you to take me with you. Yeah, I want you to take my body, my aron, my casket, and bring it up to Israel and bury me in Israel too. And obviously, there's a difference here. You see that Jacob asked for himself to be buried in Israel right away, and Joseph said, only when you leave Egypt. So there's, that's like a question or something that's pointed out. The basic answer is that, Joseph was this viceroy in Egypt. So Jacob knew that he could do it right away. And, Pharaoh would have to listen, etc., especially if he swore to it. So therefore, it happened right away. But on the other hand, Joseph, who was going to be after him? Yeah, we know, like we're going to read next week in Shemos, right, the new book of Exodus, how Pharaoh, there says there's a new king arose over Egypt who did not know of Joseph. In other words, kind of forgot everything about Joseph pretty quickly, and so they wouldn't be. He knew that he would not. The Jews, his brothers, etc., would not have the ability to bring him up to Israel right away. So that he knew for a fact. So he said, you know what? At least when you leave, when all the Jews leave, which is going to be in another, I forgot the math. I think 170 years. I don't know, a long time. When they not 107, 107. 140, I don't know, somewhere between either 140, 170 years. That's when the Jews are finally going to leave, and then you'll take me. So so that's how the Torah portion finishes off. The other answer I've heard, and maybe this is a little more, I guess, inspirational, is that Joseph wanted to the Jews. The Jews were going to be stuck in exile. Yeah, we call it Galus Mitzrayim, right? The exile of Egypt. They were going to again they'd be stuck, and it was going to be brutal, a horrible exile, slavery, etc., for well over 100 years, and he wanted to make sure that him being the the leader, the shepherd, the sustainer, right? He, in a certain sense, we call Joseph like the sustainer of the Jewish people, because when the famine was going on, who kept them alive? It was Joseph specifically. So he kind of wanted to stay behind, or at least he did. He did stay behind, and he was there with us in our suffering, etc. And that's something that also we see in Moses, right? Moses, he was buried. Well, the Torah, if you look at the end of the five books of Moses, it says that we don't know where he was buried, right? No one knows till this day where he was buried. But we know that he definitely did not make it to Israel, right? It says that God showed him the land, but you will not enter. And he passed away there in the desert with his whole generation. And there's a certain element, again, it's hard to understand in a literal sense, but that idea that he stayed back with his generation. He didn't, leave them behind, so to speak. And he's buried in this with them in that same area. And that's something that, is a big quality of Jewish leadership in general. The idea of, uh, not only not taking advantage and benefiting from leadership, which unfortunately we see around the world, starting with, the leaders of Hamas who unfortunately, are just horrific and don't care about the Palestinian people. And meanwhile, they're living, lives of luxury, and they're just enjoying themselves in Qatar and whatever. But you see it really all over the world, and it's in a certain sense, it's not. I don't want to call it natural, but it's sometimes it's unavoidable. The expression that Rabbi Shiner likes to say that power corrupts, and what's the word he says? Not ultimate power. Like having full control, complete ultimate power ultimately corrupts. Like in other words, it's very hard for people that are in a position of power to stay true, and unfortunately we see that. I'm sure all of you are, you're all just say a little bit older than me, and you've seen in your lives, let's say politicians, etc., people, leaders that you believed in, and you, etc., and all of a sudden, you see later on this happened and that happened and whatever, and it doesn't mean that we were wrong for believing in them in the beginning. It's just sometimes things happen over, once people taste the taste of power, etc. I don't want to only use the word power, but once they enter this sphere, let's just say, of power, or the places of power, it kind of plays with their minds, etc. And unfortunately, they lose some of their genuineness, etc. But that's something that's really important, and we see in Jewish leadership, is that true Jewish leaders are the ones that not only didn't try to benefit for themselves and take advantage of their places of power, but rather they will put themselves ahead, so to speak, and they stayed behind in this case that we're talking about here, to be with their flock, so to speak, and and be in their suffering, etc. That's something that unfortunately we're seeing today in the war. When if you follow, I don't know which, everyone has their source of updates of what's going on in the war, but the one that I get, I try not to follow the news too much, because it's they don't like to highlight the good parts. So I want to know what's going on the ground, but I don't need to hear all the the way they make everything so dark. But the one thing that I do see is, like, you get every day the list of soldiers that fell that day, unfortunately, and a lot of some, you'll see a lot of these, like, a lot of these, not a lot, whatever, too much are commanders, etc. In other words, they're in the front lines. They're not just commanding from afar. And I think that's one of the, I don't know this as a fact, but I've heard that's one of the qualities of the IDF, is that the leaders, the commanders, go into the combat zone with everyone, and that's a Jewish trait. There's a famous story of Samuel when the Jews wanted to appoint a king. Yeah, it's something interesting that people don't really think about, but that from the Jews, from the time the Jews entered Israel with Joshua until Samuel, the times of Samuel, which is I don't know, a good few hundred years more. There was no king in Israel. The Jews just got along. Imagine that, you know, they just got along, and they didn't need like this central power of a king, etc. And everything was working out. And then they came to Samuel and they told Samuel, "We want a king, just like all the other nations. We want a king." And we know Samuel was not happy. And one of the amongst his criticism of why the Jews are asking for a king, etc. Which, by the way, that's the story where King Saul became king, right? Samuel, the prophet Samuel, anointed King Saul as the first Jewish king, and Saul kind of failed, and that's where he was jealous of David, and the whole back and forth there, which I'm sure you've learned before and you could look up. But one of the things that the prophet Samuel says, as he's kind of disturbed by this request for a king, he says, "Have I ever taken anything from you? Like, I never benefited even 1 ounce from you, and you know, and now you're basically protesting against me." And again, we're not going into the details, but you see that idea again, that Jewish leaders are not in it for the benefit, for the fame, etc. And that's where true Jewish leadership is. And that's how you know that's a good person to be in a place of leadership. And obviously, we're all leaders in our own lives in some way, to whether it's to children, grandchildren, mentees, or just the people around us in the workplace, etc. It's very important for us to always check in with ourselves, that when we're in moments of leadership, in a mode of leadership, etc., we want to make sure that we are not being guided by any personal, I'm not going to call it selfishness, obviously, but even just benefit. There's sometimes we're not paying attention, and we could not realize what's driving us to say or do certain things. So it's always important to check in with ourselves, and to take this lesson from the Jewish leaders over history, is to make sure that we're 100% there for the people that we're helping. And we're not even subconsciously trying to get any benefit out of it. And that's, on the contrary, that's what's the famous line about, the more you give, the more you get, or the ultimate receiving is when you give. When you give wholeheartedly, etc., you give of yourself, that's when you get the most back, or the most meaningful things back. It's the things that you hold on to the most. So that's the perspective to always have. Give. Don't think about, oh, how am I gonna come out better from this. That's not the goal ever. And even to the extent of the famous very bad expression of no good deed goes unpunished. But that doesn't stop us from doing good deeds, and because we're not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for the greater good. And and therefore, I'm sure you've had that in your lifetime, especially with kids and stuff, where you go out of your way to do something good for them, and not only you don't get anything back, but you might get the opposite. But you still do it because it's right. You're there for them, and that's just another lesson we could take. So that's the general run through of the Torah portion. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other things that we could go into. I'm just going to point out maybe 2 or 3 more, and with that, we'll finish. First, before I continue, I want to just give a moment if anyone has any questions they want to ask, comments. The floor is all of yours. Okay. So one thing I like to point out is we see there's a big focus in this week's Torah portion of Menashe and Ephraim. Again, the 2 sons of Joseph, Menashe and Ephraim. Who's the older one? Who's the younger one? Etc. But let's just go into their names a little bit. The name Menashe. Why did Joseph name him Menashe? He said, I'm sold into slavery into Egypt. I want to forget the sufferings, forget everything I've been through, my brothers hating me, etc. So Nashani Lakira may help me forget my suffering. That's Menashe. Then Ephraim is the idea of like like a fruit. Ephraim being fruitful. Uh, you know, uh, uh, growing, etc. Those are the two things that they kind of represent. And in a certain sense, Ephraim represents the idea that even though he's in I don't know, not like we mentioned in the beginning about Egypt not being the best place for a good Jewish boy, um, the idea is Ephraim represents the idea of kind of having a good effect, a good influence on the people around you, to be not only to just survive, so to speak, as a Jewish person, but actually to thrive. In other words, to be giving to the people around you. That's what Ephraim was about. Menashe, on the other hand, that was more representing just the idea of being able to make sure that you hold on to and focus on, that the fact that I'm a Jew, yeah, etc. Not to let go of that. Well, kind of more looking in and working, being protective on the person's own self. And Ephraim represents more the idea of being there to have a good influence on the surroundings. And it's always this two-step process is important. On the one hand, we need step one, we need to protect ourselves, make sure we don't lose our Jewishness, etc. Over time. It's very important. And then the step two is to be able to have be a light onto the nations and have a good effect on the people around us. And you know it's interesting that Rabbi mentioned in a sermon on Shabbos that somehow many Jews, even though if they thought they were unaffiliated or unassociated, or whatever word they want to use, after October 7th, they all they felt something, that you can't run away from it anymore. You're part of it, etc. There's a lot of that going around, and um, it's unfortunate that it took something so drastic to bring that out, but it's something that I think is an opportune time to really seize on it and to be able to, um, let our fellow Jewish people. I'm sure we all know people that are fit into that category of people that maybe thought they could ignore their Jewishness or just not be involved in it, but all of a sudden it's kind of being forced upon them, and we need to help make sure Jews have a good foundation in their Judaism and know, what being Jewish is all about and what it means and how important it is and, what we represent, not to be embarrassed, etc. All these things, it's important for us to be there for our brothers and sisters in that way, and to encourage them, etc. And that's the story that we're about to start about the Jews being in Egypt, foreign land, or not only not a Jew, not only not a Jewish land, but like the opposite, not a good place for a good Jewish boy or girl, Egypt. But we were put there, and we somehow stuck together and remained Jews in such a place. And that's the story, and that's why this kind of happened. In a certain sense, it says the stories of the three patriarchs, Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and the whole book of Genesis really is all kind of, they went through a lot of what they went through to give us the ability to go through what we have to go through, and what they went through represents what we go through, etc. Not only in lessons, but also in strength and ability and koach. And that's why Jacob and his family kind of had to go down to Egypt, um, to kind of be the precursor to our being, not necessarily always in our land in a Jewish environment, etc., and still, remaining Jews, etc. And that's the story that we're about to enter, and and that's really the story of Joseph, him being in Egypt and still, staying a proud Jew, and not only him being, even raising his children to be good Jews, and that's why Jacob was so excited to bless them, and that's why he treated them special and gave them special status to be, considered one of his own sons. Yeah, because they didn't grow up in a Jewish environment around their grandfather, and they still stay true. And that's really what the Torah portion's name Vayechi is all about. Again, he lived his best life, his best years in Egypt, because he saw that his legacy, the Jewish story, the Jewish legacy, not only didn't wasn't downgrading, so to speak. On the contrary, it was flourishing and becoming stronger and being tested, in different environments and still staying true. That's how you know that it's the right thing. That's how you know it's truth, etc. So that was his his years with the most nachas, so to speak. Vayechi Yaakov. Yaakov lived. He lived his best 7 years, 17 years. And I'll just finish off with one line that I hear Rabbi Shiner repeating a lot is, how do you know that um, how do you know that you're someone's Jewish in a physical sense? How do you know that they're Jewish? Is if their parents and grandparents are Jewish, then they're Jewish, right? How do you know if someone's Jewish spiritually? Obviously not literally, so to speak. It's when their kids and grandkids are Jewish, are proud Jews, etc. So that's and that's what Yaakov got to see in this week's Torah portion. His grandkids growing up in Egypt and still being proud Jews, and knowing what Judaism is all about, etc. So that's our job. We want to keep Yaakov, keep giving him nachas, so to speak, keeping him alive. You know, um, and that's our job. And again, it's a very opportune time to really act upon that. So that's all I'll leave you off with. Want to wish everyone a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week. I hope you're having a nice, relaxing week, even though the weather is not cooperating as much. But it was really nice to see everyone, and we're looking forward to having you all here, whether sometime in the near future or even the Shabbos. Um, I wish you all the best, and yeah, have a great rest of your week.